Welcome back to the channel, everyone, where we love talking about movies and more. I'm your host, Mason Phillips, and today I have a very special video for you, one that I've been wanting to work on for quite a while. But before we go any further, I want to ask you guys, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and then hit that bell icon so you get notified when new videos go live to this channel. When you guys do that, it always helps me out, and I greatly appreciate it. For this video, we're going to talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and how it should have been released. This is one of my favorite franchises of all time. I've been obsessed with it since Captain America: The First Avenger, and then even more so once the Avengers came out the following year. Those two films really shaped my whole love of this entire series. Then went back and watched the rest of Phase 1, all the films that led up to the Avengers, and I have been captivated by this series ever since. Now, it hasn't been perfect since Endgame. We have had a bit of a bumpy road through Phases 4 and 5. However, I feel like a lot of the issues through Phases 4 and 5 specifically could have been mitigated had certain things been released in a very particular order. I think a lot of the MCU for Phases 4 and 5 specifically was released in the wrong order. Certain sequels to other projects were released way later than they should have been, so momentum was killed. The through line plot of building up the Multiverse Saga was killed. The hype was dead, and it really hindered the momentum of the entire MCU. Now, this whole project, this series that I'm working on here, is not to fix the story. You can go to channels like Black Lion. He does a lot of really cool restructuring videos over on his channel. That's not really what this video is. This video is really just to put the MCU in the proper viewing order. Now, I will be making some slight edits to the film, but not for the stories. It'll be where certain post-credit scenes will go. I'll be shifting those things around a little bit, but the stories overall, I'm not going to be changing. The plots of these films are still going to remain the same. The plots of these shows are still going to remain the same. This video is hopefully going to show you a better way in how you can watch the MCU and maybe better enjoy it as we lead up to Avengers Doomsday, and maybe feel an actual momentum build as you go from project to project. Hopefully this will make your viewing experience much more exciting, but I'm going all the way back to Phase 1.
So, what made to you so special?
Nothing. I'm just a kid from Brooklyn.
I think that the viewing order of the MCU has been messed up since the beginning, and a lot of that is attributed to how the MCU was started. Now, I believe that Kevin Feige actually wanted to start with Captain America, making Captain America: The First Avenger the proper start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, it makes sense. The film is set in the 1940s, set during World War II, so it makes sense to actually start there. However, the first film that was released in the MCU was Iron Man, and a lot of that came down to the fact that Iron Man was going to sell more toys. That's what the executives at Marvel at the time thought that was the best course of action, was to get a character propped up that was more attractive to merchandise, more attractive for the marketing, and they thought Iron Man was the better character to start with. In this quote-unquote perfect MCU viewing order, I think you should start with Captain America: The First Avenger, and I think starting with The First Avenger will actually help to create even better momentum in Phase 1. Captain America: The First Avenger sets up so many things. There are so many through lines and plot points that are set up in First Avenger that carry on not just through Phase 1 but through the rest of the MCU. But for the Infinity Saga, it's actually better to start with the First Avenger and not Iron Man, because in the First Avenger we have an Infinity Stone in the Tesseract, which is also the Space Stone. Starting with the First Avenger really feels like a better beginning for the Infinity Saga. Also, with the end of Endgame, it's a great bookend because you start with Captain America, and then the final scene of Endgame is Cap reunited with Peggy Carter, so it works perfectly as a bookend for the entire Infinity Saga to start with the First Avenger. Now, the plot of this film is set between 1942 and 1945 during the height of World War II. Steve Rogers is a sickly, skinny young man in 1940s Brooklyn who desperately wants to enlist in the U.S. Army during World War II. Despite being repeatedly rejected due to poor health, Steve's defining trait is clear: unshakable moral courage. His best friend, Bucky Barnes, gets accepted and ships off to war while Steve stays behind until fate intervenes. Steve catches the attention of Dr. Abraham Erskine, who values Steve's character over physical strength.
I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from.
Steve is selected for a secret project backed by the U.S. government called Project Rebirth. The intent of this project is to create the ultimate super soldier used in combat throughout the war effort. He undergoes the super soldier serum and Vita-Ray treatment, transforming him into a peak human specimen. Immediately after, Erskine is assassinated by a Hydra agent, making Steve the only successful super soldier. Instead of being sent to fight, Steve is used as a propaganda tool to sell war bonds as Captain America. He becomes famous, but feels useless and frustrated, knowing real soldiers are dying overseas. Meanwhile, Hydra, led by Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull, is using the power of the Tesseract to build advanced weapons that had never been seen by mankind up to this point. Steve learns that Bucky's unit, the 107th, has been captured by Hydra. Against orders, Steve stages a solo rescue mission, proving himself an actual combat hero. He saves Bucky and many others, finally earning the respect of the military, and specifically his commanding officer, Colonel Phillips, in this film played by Tommy Lee Jones. Steve assembles a squad, the Howling Commandos, and goes on a series of missions against Hydra. This team includes Bucky Barnes, Jim Morita, Gabe Jones, and Dum Dum Dugan, just to name a few. The Red Skull reveals his plan to use Tesseract-powered weapons to dominate the world. Steve confronts Red Skull multiple times, learning that unchecked power without morality leads to destruction. Throughout the film, in the effort to stop the Red Skull and Hydra, Captain America and the Howling Commandos board a train to capture Hydra's lead scientist, Arnim Zola. However, in this battle, Bucky Barnes is lost in this fight and presumed dead.
Grab my hand!
In a final act to take down the forces of Hydra, Steve and the Howling Commandos attack Hydra's primary base in the Swiss Alps. Hydra launches planes armed with weapons of mass destruction aimed at major cities. In this battle, Steve boards the lead aircraft and realizes it cannot land safely. Makes the ultimate choice and crashes the plane into the Arctic to save millions, knowing that he will die. In his final moments, Steve shares a heartbreaking final radio conversation with Peggy Carter before losing consciousness.
Steve? Steve?
Presumably sacrificing his life in the Arctic wasteland. So the key details to focus on in how to position this film as the start of the MCU, certain edits will have to be made to Captain America the First Avenger. So I said the primary plot of this film will remain the same. However, we do have to have a new opening. We're going to move the present day sequences from the beginning of the film and the end of the film to a later spot in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So we're going to move them off of Captain America the First Avenger, establishing that throughout this film and with Steve's ultimate sacrifice at the end of the film, it actually matters for a time, and it actually feels like we did truly lose Captain America. As an audience member, you don't feel that. You feel the out of time placement, you feel the man out of time scenario with Captain America, and you feel the sadness that he's no longer with Peggy, that he is now in our present time, and Peggy had to go years without Steve Rogers, believing that he was surely dead. But in this version of the First Avenger, we will not be including those sequences where S.H.I.E.L.D. finds Captain America's body in the Arctic. So we open up with the Paramount logo, the Marvel logo at the beginning of the First Avenger. Then, instead of opening up on that sequence where S.H.I.E.L.D. finds the crashed ship and Captain America's body, we open up on Tonsberg, Norway being attacked by the Red Skull and Hydra in 1942. And then of course the plot of Captain America the First Avenger plays out the exact same way. No edits will be made throughout the course of the main plot of the film. But at the end, we have the next change. We will then have this montage, of course, of the Allied forces winning World War II. Everybody's mourning the loss of Captain America. Howard Stark finds the Tesseract lost in the ocean. And at the end, Peggy Carter receives the file from Colonel Phillips on Steve Rogers. She mourns Steve's loss, remembers him fondly, and then we have a final shot of some kids playing in the streets of New York City with a trash can Captain America shield, playing as though they are Captain America and the Howling Commandos. We end with that shot, cut to black, and then go into the end credits. We don't go into the scene where Captain America wakes up in the S.H.I.E.L.D. facility. So in this story, it's believed that Captain America is dead. Of course, the audience and comic book fans alike will expect to see Captain America later down the line, but in this version of the story, we don't revisit him. That's it. He made the sacrifice. We cut to credits. That's the film. And I think this version actually works better, and it makes Captain America's sacrifice more impactful. Then we go into the end credits. They play out the exact same way until we get to the very end. Now, at the very end of Captain America the First Avenger, those end credits then teased the Avengers, which was the next film in the series, coming out right after the First Avenger the next year, the following summer. However, that's not what's happening in this version of Captain America the First Avenger. In this version, rather than the end credits saying that Captain America will return in the Avengers, it says that Peggy Carter will return in Agent Carter. And then we tease her story that will follow up the events of Captain America the First Avenger in Agent Carter Season 1. So we get a clip of that first episode of Peggy being approached by Jarvis and Howard Stark, and that will tee up the events of what's to come in Season 1 of Agent Carter that would, in my mind, be released the following year. So yes, we will do a little bit of restructuring and a little bit of pretending on when these films should have been released or these projects should have been released. So Captain America the First Avenger, I would put for normally in 2009, because in the way that Marvel had worked, the way that certain films had come out, Chris Evans had just played Johnny Storm in the Fantastic Four films, and the second Fantastic Four film, Rise of the Silver Surfer, the second and last one that he was in, was released in 2007. So it would be a little weird that the following year he would then play another superhero. He needed a little bit of time until he was willing to play Captain America. So in the real world, this film came out in 2011, but we're going to shift it to 2009 would probably be the best way, the best year to start the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So instead of 2008, 2009 is when the MCU starts, and in the real world, there was no MCU film that was released in 2009. The only Marvel project, to my knowledge, that was released in 2009 was X-Men Origins Wolverine. So alongside that film, we'll also have Captain America the First Avenger, and then the following winter, that very same year, we would have the first season of Agent Carter on ABC. So we have that clip of Agent Carter that's used as a post-credit scene for Captain America the First Avenger, and then we cut to the final logos, the Marvel logo and the Paramount logo play one more time on screen before we cut to black, and that is my version of Captain America the First Avenger for this version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Then next in the series, it organically moves to Agent Carter Season 1.
What's your name, darling?
Agent.
Picks up 1 year after the events of Captain America the First Avenger ending in 1945, Agent Carter Season 1 picking up in 1946. Now in the real world, this series was released at the beginning of 2015. We will be releasing this series instead at the end of 2009, releasing just a couple of months after the release of Captain America the First Avenger, making these the two projects that are released in 2009 for the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So the first season of Agent Carter Season 1 is set in 1946, shortly after Steve Rogers' disappearance. Peggy Carter works for the Strategic Scientific Reserve in their New York headquarters. Despite having been a capable agent during the war, she's looked over by her male peers, being treated as nothing more than a secretary. At the beginning of the season, Peggy is still grieving the loss of Steve, carrying both love and guilt over his sacrifice. Howard Stark is accused of selling advanced weapons to criminals. He contacts Peggy, the only person he trusts, asking her to clear his name. Peggy agrees and begins secretly investigating Stark's stolen inventions. Howard's butler, Edwin Jarvis, becomes Peggy's partner, providing resources, tech, and emotional support. Peggy balances her cover with covert field missions. She retrieves and neutralizes multiple stolen Stark tech items, each revealing how dangerous the situation is. The SSR investigates the same crimes, unknowingly chasing Peggy herself. Agent Daniel Souza, a wounded war veteran, begins to suspect that Peggy is more than she seems. Peggy discovers the thefts are connected to a shadowy organization called Leviathan, a Soviet-backed group. Leviathan uses Stark weapons and psychological manipulation rather than brute force. Their primary enforcer, Dottie Underwood, infiltrates Peggy's apartment building under the guise of a friendly neighbor. Dottie Underwood, in this chronology, is also the first Black Widow agent that we see throughout the course of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, predating the appearance of Natasha Romanoff. Peggy and Dottie engage in a tense psychological cat-and-mouse game. Dottie tries to break Peggy emotionally, mocking her grief over Steve. Peggy eventually exposes Dottie, but SSR leadership underestimates her threat. Dottie escapes custody, proving Leviathan is far from finished. Leviathan's leader is revealed to be Dr. Johann Venhoff. Venhoff manipulates Howard Stark, forcing him to reveal the location of his most dangerous invention. Peggy confronts her superiors and finally earns partial trust by revealing her secret work. Leviathan attempts to unleash a devastating Stark invention designed to cause mass casualties. Peggy, Jarvis, Souza, and Howard work together to stop the plan. Peggy defeats Dottie in a brutal fight, refusing to become as ruthless as her enemy. Leviathan's scheme is dismantled and Venhoff is captured. Howard Stark is cleared of all charges. Peggy is finally acknowledged as a real agent. However, due to the time, she is still looked over for her accomplishments. Souza grows closer to Peggy, hinting at a future relationship between the two. Peggy lets go of some of her grief over Steve, stepping into her own identity, no longer in Captain America's shadow, but a hero in her own right. Now again, for changing these edits, for truly feeling the sacrifice of Captain America, him not being discovered by S.H.I.E.L.D., but we're still living in the 1940s of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we still feel that loss and that sacrifice of Steve Rogers. So the events of Agent Carter Season 1, for everything that Peggy goes through, we still feel that true loss, and then at the end of Season 1, she has that closure moment of moving on from Steve. We feel that loss, we feel that sadness, and again, I feel it's even more impactful here because of the changes that we made to the first Avenger. Then, with the next project, we move on to Agent Carter Season 2.
Miss Carter.
Mr. Jarvis.
Into the next season of the show. Season 1 took place in 1946. This next season takes place in 1947. Set in 1947, the season moves from New York to Los Angeles. Peggy transfers to the SSR West Coast office, hoping for a fresh start in real field work. Instead, she runs into very similar problems that she faced while at the New York offices. Daniel Souza, now chief of the West Coast SSR offices, brings unresolved feelings and tension from Season 1. The SSR investigates a series of bizarre incidents involving people turning violent and dying mysteriously. Victims show signs of radiation poisoning pointing to experimental technology. The case leads Peggy to Isodyne Energy, a powerful research company working on advanced atomic science. A new scientist, Dr. Jason Wilkes, becomes a key figure and for a time becomes Peggy's new romantic interest. Peggy discovers the true culprit is zero matter, a dangerous otherworldly energy. Exposure destabilizes matter, kills people, and warps physical reality. Wilkes is exposed to zero matter and becomes partially intangible, slowly being consumed by it. The substance is revealed to be tied to secret experiments that were run during the events of World War II. The season's main antagonist is Whitney Frost, a brilliant physicist and actress married to a U.S. senator. Frost absorbs zero matter during an experiment gaining power, but at the cost of her stability. Unlike Red Skull or Leviathan, Frost is motivated by rage at being erased, not world domination. Peggy struggles emotionally as Wilkes deteriorates, and Frost mirrors what Peggy herself could become if broken. Sousa wrestles with jealousy, loyalty, and his feelings for Peggy. Jarvis faces a personal crisis when his wife Anna is injured as collateral damage, straining his friendship with Peggy. The team begins to fracture under guilt, grief, and anger. Zero matter amplifies emotional pain, much like the super soldier serum amplified traits in Steve. Wilkes briefly turns ruthless under its influence. Frost becomes increasingly unstable, determined to reshape the world so women like her can never be dismissed again. Peggy realizes that unresolved trauma, not just power, is the real danger. Frost plans to use zero matter to trigger a catastrophic event killing thousands. Peggy and the SSR infiltrate Isodyne's facility in a high-stakes confrontation. Peggy uses resolve to stop Frost. Zero matter is contained, Wilkes is saved, and Frost is defeated, though not redeemed. Peggy and Sousa finally acknowledge their feelings, and Peggy accepts that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting Steve. It means choosing life again. The season ends with Peggy more confident, more grounded, and firmly established as a leader. Unfortunately, in the final moments of Season 2, Jack Thompson is killed by a mysterious figure for information that he holds probably tied to the rise of Hydra, returning once again, having not been defeated as we thought back in Captain America: The First Avenger. So from Agent Carter Season 1, we move on to the events of Agent Carter Season 2 in this version of the MCU, released just a few months after the break from Agent Carter Season 1. Again, like Season 1, no edits, no changes will be made to the structure of Agent Carter Season 2. Then we move on to the Marvel one-shot Agent Carter. This one-shot has to act as the conclusion of Peggy's primary story. The show was supposed to continue with a third and possibly fourth season, seeing the transition of Peggy Carter being an SSR agent to not only an active S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, but one of the founding members of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well. The Marvel one-shot Agent Carter, when it was released, was seen as the concept for what an Agent Carter show could be. So in this version, we watch it after the events of Season 1 and Season 2, acting as the culmination and final outing of Peggy Carter through these SSR missions. In the one-shot, Peggy is back at the New York offices of the SSR. Now, of course, because this is not a true continuation, it is a little odd in how it doesn't reference certain characters. Daniel Sousa is not mentioned whatsoever. Neither is Jack Thompson. So it appears as though Peggy has just forgotten everything about her past in the MCU. Of course, that's not the case when they filmed this. The Agent Carter series didn't exist yet, but now we have to treat it as though this is taking place after the events of Season 1 and Season 2, because at the end of this one-shot, Howard Stark calls for Peggy to come to Washington, D.C. with him and Colonel Phillips to launch the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement Logistics Division, also known as S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. will effectively replace the Strategic Scientific Reserve. This is also a little weird in how Howard Stark is seen as a true leader and is actually revered by many in the SSR, whereas that was not the case, of course, through Season 1 and Season 2 of Agent Carter. So a lot has had to happen through this jump from 1947 to 1948. Much has happened in this year, and Howard Stark is now very well regarded by many members of the Strategic Scientific Reserve, many of them even taking orders from him directly. You kind of have to look past that. It's a minor issue, not really a make or break moment for where to place this in the timeline. And this one shot I would probably release in the same year, with the production team knowing that the series would no longer continue. The team at Marvel Studios films this quick one shot to wrap up Peggy's story. This one shot also being released in 2010, shortly after the release of Agent Carter Season 2. Now in this one shot, Peggy was still grieving over the loss of Steve Rogers Avengers. Of course, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense since she resolved all of those feelings in season 1, and it appears that she has moved on. But placing this after the events of Agent Carter season 2, I believe that now the reason of Peggy going back to the New York offices is due to the loss of Jack Thompson. Maybe she couldn't reconcile with that. Maybe she did truly miss him after he had a bit of a redemption arc through season 2. So maybe the loss of Jack Thompson hit Peggy in a very hard way. She wasn't able to really stay with Sousa. Maybe they had a falling out, maybe they didn't. I don't know. It's hard to say what really happened between the two of them after the events of season 2 of Agent Carter. But between those events, now in 1948, Peggy is back at the New York offices. They have done a bit of remodeling. It doesn't quite look like the New York offices did in Agent Carter season 1 and season 2. Maybe they moved locations, we don't know. That first office was attacked before, so maybe they thought they should move it to a more secure location. Who's to say? But there is a new leader, a new chief at the SSR station in New York. Makes complete sense. Jack Thompson's dead. Somebody else had to take over for him. Sousa, him not being in this, the explanation is just that he stayed back in the West Coast offices in California. So that's the brief explanation as to where those characters are and where we are now with the events of this one-shot. For the plot of the story, the SSR receives intelligence about a dangerous criminal group called Zodiac and a mysterious device, being assigned office work rather than field agent work. This is another change. It can be easily explained. Peggy was seemingly well regarded at the end of season 1 of Agent Carter, was seen as a capable agent by others in season 2. So seeing that she gained the credibility and respect of her peers, but in this one shot, it's like everything that had been done throughout seasons 1 and 2, all the respect that she earned was completely erased. So we'll just attribute all of that to the fact that this is a completely new group working at the New York SSR offices, and they don't revere Peggy Carter like her previous co-workers did. While late at the office, the SSR receives an incoming transmission. Peggy listens in and realizes she has critical insight that her peers are ignoring. She knows how to tackle this mission and will do so on her own. Frustrated but determined, Peggy secretly takes on the mission herself. She arms up, improvises gear, and heads to the location alone. Peggy infiltrates a Roxxon oil facility where Zodiac agents are operating. She takes down the criminals using skill, strategy, and sheer toughness. She retrieves the mysterious device, the Zodiac Key, a powerful energy weapon. Peggy returns the device to the SSR. Of course, her co-workers take full credit for this mission, brushing her aside. Publicly, Peggy is invisible once again. Howard Stark calls in and exposes the truth that Peggy completed this mission all on her own.
I'd say that last night was more a notch in her belt than a feather in her cap.
Yes, sir. What are your orders?
Phillips and I wanted to come to Washington.
Howard offers her a job working directly with him on covert operations at the newly formed Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division. Alongside Howard and Colonel Phillips, Peggy will run the new organization as one of its founding members.
Agent Carter, it is my honor to inform you that you are going to run S.H.I.E.L.D.
Of course, the events of this one-shot originally were set to take place in 1946. We have moved it to 1948 to take place after the events of Season 1 and Season 2 of Agent Carter. It just makes more sense to put it here. Now, we will have to do a little bit of editing. Of course, the one-shot does open up with a flashback to the events of Captain America the First Avenger, but Season 1 of Agent Carter already did that, so it doesn't make sense to put it here, especially with the resolution that Peggy made with the loss of Steve at the end of Season 1 of Agent Carter. Again, we have to make a few changes in order for this one-shot to make a little bit more sense in this timeline. So a new opening is required. So of course we have the Marvel logo, and then instead of having that flashback from the first Avenger, we have the final scene of Agent Carter Season 2 replay here with the loss of Jack Thompson. He is assassinated by a hitman, and a secret file that he has is taken by this hitman, and I assume that this hitman actually works for Hydra. And of course at the end of Agent Carter Season 1, Arnim Zola appears in the prison right next to Dr. Fenhoff, so it's kind of teasing and teeing up the fact that Hydra hasn't completely gone away. They're operating in the shadows. They will rebuild within the SSR and S.H.I.E.L.D. All in the shadows, they will plan to rise back to prominence and regain their power. So Thompson is killed, and then we cut to the main part of the one-shot. Jump to 1 year later. This is 1 year now after the events of Season 2 of Agent Carter. So we open with Peggy now retconning the events. She was mourning the loss of Steve. Now she's primarily mourning the loss of Thompson and probably the loss of relationship that she had with Sousa. Some falling out has happened. Some things have changed. That is where we find Peggy at the opening of this one-shot. It helps to kind of pick up from where Season 2 left off with that major cliffhanger. We're not really going to resolve it directly, but this is the best that we could do with what we've got. Again, not changing the plots, just doing a little bit of re-editing to make these stories flow from project to project just a little bit better. And then the next change we'll have to make is with the end credits. In the original version, it says that Captain America will return in Captain America the Winter Soldier. Of course, course, at this point, Captain America is still presumed dead, and the Winter Soldier, that film, is still a little ways down the line. So now the end credits say, S.H.I.E.L.D. will return in Captain Marvel. I was thinking, do I put that Peggy Carter will return? And I decided not to include that here because Peggy doesn't return in a major way after this one shot. Now, of course, you have the What If series, but that's a different Peggy Carter, and maybe she'll have a major role in Avengers Doomsday, but again, we just don't know. Right now, there is no immediate project to expect Peggy Carter, and even when she does return, she'll have an appearance, of course, in the Winter Soldier for a little bit. She makes a cameo in the Ant-Man film. She's in a little sequence in Avengers Age of Ultron. She's seen briefly in Avengers Endgame, but she doesn't have a major role after this one shot. So I thought it made more sense to tease that S.H.I.E.L.D. that has just been established at the end of this one shot will return in the next project. And I love teeing up and teasing the next projects. There's not really like a post-credit scene or anything I can tease, a clip I can move here from Captain Marvel to make it make sense, because that is the next project in the story. Is after the Marvel one-shot Agent Carter, we would then move on to the Captain Marvel movie set in the 1990s. So I thought this was the best way to have that tease of what's to come, but not make any major changes that would feel jarring or out of place. And that's the last change we'll be making to this one shot. So then we have in 2010, it's the second film in this version of the MCU, Phase 1, it's Captain Marvel. The movie starts with Carol Danvers, who goes by Veers as a member of the Kree Star Force, an elite military unit. She has superpowers, strength, energy blasts, and flight, but no memory of her past. Her mentor, Jan Rog, keeps telling her to control her emotions and trust the Kree Supreme Intelligence, an AI that rules the Kree. The Kree are at war with the Skrulls, a shape-shifting alien race portrayed at first as the bad guys. Veers goes on a mission that goes wrong and gets captured by the Skrulls. While probing her memories, the Skrulls see flashes of Earth in the 1980s. She escapes, crash landing on Earth, specifically in a Blockbuster video store, which immediately sets the retro 90s tone. On Earth, Veers meets S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Nick Fury. The Skrulls follow her and impersonate people around her, creating paranoia. Veers starts investigating her memories and discovers she was once Carol Danvers, a U.S. Air Force pilot. Carol's memories slowly come back. She worked with Dr. Wendy Lawson, a scientist secretly developing a light-speed engine. Lawson was actually Mar-Vell, a Kree who defected to help the Skrull refugees. Carol gets her powers when the engine, powered by the Tesseract, also known as the Space Stone, explodes. During the explosion, she absorbs its energy. The Kree then captured her, erased her memory, and used a power inhibitor to limit her abilities. The Skrulls, led by Talos, are actually refugees, not conquerors. The Kree are the real aggressors committing genocide to maintain their empire. Talos just wants to reunite his people with their families. This completely flips Carol's understanding of the war and her identity. Carol removes her inhibitor on her neck and finally accesses her full power. She fully embraces who she is, no longer Kree, not defined by her past failures, and not holding back. She wrecks the Kree force, including their leader, Ronan the Accuser. Jan Rog tries to manipulate Carol into proving herself in a fair fight. She sends him back to the Kree as a warning. Carol decides to help the Skrulls find a new home and stop the Kree Empire. Carol leaves Earth to protect the galaxy. She inspires Fury to start the Avengers initiative, named after Carol's old call sign, Avenger. So in placing Captain Marvel as the second film in the MCU and not in Phase 3 when it originally came out right before Avengers Endgame, this requires a little bit of editing. So what we're going to have to do is put in a new opening logo for one. At this point, the Paramount deal with Marvel was no longer. They were owned by Disney, so they were not being distributed by Paramount Pictures anymore. Throughout all of Phase 1, those films were distributed, with the exception of the Avengers. Iron Man up to Captain America the First Avenger were all distributed through Paramount Pictures. That was a deal that was made with Marvel Studios and Paramount before Marvel was bought by Disney. Of course, when the contract finally ran out, Disney moved to distributing those films on their own. We have to change the opening logo, so in this new edit you'll see the Paramount logo and then the old Marvel Studios logo, the flip page logo, not the new Marvel logo. You won't have that anymore. You'll have the old logo. So you'll have that, and then you'll transition into the opening scene of Captain Marvel. We're not changing that at all. And then we'll go to the end. The next edit is the end of the film, right before the end credits. So instead of the last scene of the movie that plays right before the credits being between Coulson and Fury talking about setting up the Avengers initiative, we're going to be moving that scene and making that the new mid-credit scene. So the end of the film will actually end with Carol escorting the Skrulls off to a new home planet. We'll end with that, and then we'll move right into the end credits. And then once the first part of the end credits finish playing, you'll get the Captain Marvel title splash page. Then the new mid-credits scene, rather than it being a scene that's set right after the events of Avengers Infinity War, doesn't make sense in this release, so we'll have to push that scene off to a later point in the MCU. You can already tell that scene's going to be put somewhere in Phase 3. We'll hold off on that for a while. This new mid-credits scene is going to be the original ending scene of this movie, and it's Coulson and Fury talking about setting up the Avengers Initiative, which I think is a better mid-credits scene in this release order. It really sets up and teases what's to come as we get closer and closer to the Avengers. So then we go into the rest of the end credits. The original post-credits scene remains the same. Goose the Flurkin still spits up the Tesseract on Fury's desk. That remains the same. And then we've got a new end tag. Now initially at the end of the movie it said Captain Marvel will return in Avengers Endgame. We're not going to be doing that because, for one, there's no reason to tease another Avengers movie before we even get to the first Avengers movie. So in this instance we're just going to say Captain Marvel will return. We're going to be a little ambiguous on her return rather than teasing up a specific point when this character will return. Right now we're just going to say the character will return, but it's going to be a mystery for now. In this reality, the audience may have been left to believe, oh, this character is going to return in the 2012 Avengers film, the first Avengers film, or another project pretty soon, but we just don't know at this time. And then of course we have a new end logo. We end with the old Marvel Studios logo and the Paramount logo as all these first films in Phase 1 would have ended. Then we move on to the last project of 2010. In this reality, it's Iron Man.
Yeah, I can fly.
The film opens with Tony Stark, CEO of Stark Industries, showing off a new missile called the Jericho in Afghanistan. Tony is brilliant, rich, reckless, and very comfortable selling weapons to the US military. His closest relationships are with Pepper Potts, his assistant, and James Rhodey Rhodes, his best friend in the Air Force, also the liaison between the Air Force and Stark Industries. After the weapons demo, Tony's convoy is ambushed by a terrorist group called the Ten Rings. Tony is critically wounded by shrapnel heading toward his heart. He's captured and imprisoned in a cave where another captive, Yinsen, saves his life by implanting an electromagnet powered by a car battery to keep the shrapnel from killing him. The Ten Rings force Tony to build them a Jericho missile, but instead, Tony secretly builds a miniaturized arc reactor to power both the magnet and a suit of armor. With Yinsen's help, he creates the bulky Mark I Iron Man suit. Yinsen sacrifices himself so Tony can escape, which deeply changes the course of Tony's life.
My turn.
Back home, Tony announces that Stark Industries will stop manufacturing weapons. This shocks the company and angers Obadiah Stane, his father's old partner and the acting head of the company.
Oh, that went well.
Tony becomes obsessed with improving the armor, building sleeker versions powered by a refined arc reactor. Tony tests new suits Marks II and III, dealing with icing problems, crashing, and trial and error engineering. He secretly starts using the red and gold Mark III to destroy weapon stockpiles being used by terrorists, including the Ten Rings. He makes a public display as Iron Man in the Mark III armor in Yinsen's home village of Gulmira. The public and military don't know who Iron Man is yet. He's just a mysterious armored figure. Tony discovers that Obadiah Stane has been secretly selling Stark weapons to terrorists, including the Ten Rings. Stane arranged Tony's kidnapping, expecting him to die. Stane steals Tony's arc reactor and uses stolen tech to build his own massive suit, the Ironmonger. Pepper and S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Phil Coulson expose Stane's crimes. Tony, weakened without his main arc reactor, installs an older prototype and fights Stane in downtown Los Angeles. Pepper overloads a giant arc reactor at Stark Industries, incapacitating Stane and killing him. Tony survives, fully committed to being Iron Man. At a press conference meant to keep his identity secret, Tony abandons the cover story and says,
I am Iron Man.
Changing the course of the MCU forever. In a post-credits scene, Nick Fury appears before Tony Stark, telling him,
I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger initiative,
setting up Tony's larger role within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now with Iron Man, there's no edits that need to be made other than the end. Now in the first couple MCU movies, there was no tease of any characters set up to return. It didn't say Tony Stark will return, but in this version we're going to say Tony Stark will return in Iron Man 2. Knowing that both films are filmed back to back, in this reality the public would already be aware that Iron Man 2 was on the horizon. So at the end of this film, it'll say Tony Stark will return in Iron Man 2. And that's the only change we'll need to make to this movie. And then we've got the first project of 2011, and it's of course Iron Man 2.
Oh, it's good to be back.
The movie picks up after Tony Stark publicly revealed he's Iron Man. Tony is now a global celebrity using the suit for peacekeeping and showboating. The US government, led by Senator Stern, wants him to hand over the Iron Man tech, claiming it's a national security issue.
My priority is to get the Iron Man weapon turned over to the people of the United States of America.
Well, you can forget it.
Tony refuses, insisting no one else can replicate it safely, providing hilarious examples like Justin Hammer's attempt at making his own Iron Man suit.
Most countries 5-10 years away. Hammer Industries 20.
I'd like to point out that test pilot survived.
Behind the scenes, Tony is in trouble. The palladium core in his arc reactor is poisoning him and slowly killing him. He hides this from Pepper and Rhodey and starts behaving recklessly. Pepper is promoted to CEO of Stark Industries, adding strain to their relationship. Meanwhile, in Russia, Ivan Vanko, son of disgraced scientist Anton Vanko, builds his own arc reactor. He blames the Stark family for his father's ruin and vows revenge. Ivan attacks Tony at the Monaco Grand Prix using electric whips powered by his reactor. Tony defeats him, but the world sees that Iron Man tech can be replicated. Ivan is captured, but breaks out with help from rival arms dealer Justin Hammer. Hammer recruits Ivan to build better weapons and drones for the US military. Ivan secretly plans to double-cross Hammer and use the drones for his own revenge. As the palladium poisoning worsens, Tony throws an out-of-control birthday party while wearing the suit. Rhodey, fed up, puts on the Mark II armor.
I'm only gonna say this once.
Get out.
And fights Tony to stop him. Rhodey takes the suit to the government, where it's upgraded into the Mark I War Machine suit with hammer tech. Nick Fury intervenes and reveals that Howard Stark worked on a new element that Tony can use, but didn't have the technology to synthesize it at the time.
He said that you were the only person with the means and knowledge to finish what he started. Are you that guy? Are you? Because if you are, then you can solve the riddle of your heart.
Using his father's old research and the Stark Expo model, Tony successfully creates a new, non-toxic arc reactor core, saving his life.
Dead for almost 20 years. Still taking me to school. Thanks, Dad.
This also helps Tony reconcile some of his complicated feelings about his father.
What is and always will be my greatest creation is you.
At the Stark Expo, Ivan hijacks Hammer's drone army and war machine, launching a full attack on civilians. Tony and Rhodey fight together for the first time as a true duo. Ivan shows up in a heavily armored suit.
Good to be back.
Fighting Iron Man and War Machine at once. The battle ends when Tony and Rhodey fire a combined repulsor blast, incapacitating Ivan.
You lose.
It's revealed Ivan never intended to survive. His goal was revenge, not victory. And then in this moment, self-destructs all of the drones, destroying them and himself. In the aftermath, Rhodey and the government keep the War Machine armor. Tony is declared not recommended for the Avengers initiative, but allowed to act as a consultant. In a post-credit scene, Agent Coulson discovers Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, in the New Mexico desert, teasing the next MCU film, Thor.
Sir, we found it.
So in this movie, just like Iron Man, there's not really going to be any changes needed. We're just going to add a tag at the end of this film stating that Tony Stark will return. We're not going to say Tony Stark will return in the Avengers, because as it was set up at the end of this film, Tony Stark is now going to be seen as a consultant, not a possible member for the Avengers just yet. Rather than teasing and setting him up to be in the Avengers and spoiling that for the audience, even though the audience is probably pretty aware that he will be in the Avengers, it would be best to say that Tony Stark will return and just leave it a little ambiguous for the time. The next project after Iron Man 2 is the Marvel one-shot. A funny thing happened on the way to Thor's hammer.
Who wants that car outside? I do. But it's really more like a lease.
Rather than this being released after Thor came out, this will be released maybe a month or so before Thor comes out, and will be teeing up Agent Coulson's first solo mission as he heads to New Mexico to discover Thor's hammer. Agent Phil Coulson is driving towards New Mexico. After his role in the events of Iron Man 2, he's sent by S.H.I.E.L.D. to track an anomaly happening above the New Mexico desert. While on the road, Coulson stops at a Roxxon gas station to refuel. So far, everything's pretty calm, mundane, very Agent Coulson. Inside the store, 2 armed robbers burst in and start holding up the cashier. Coulson, completely unflappable, stays quiet and observes. When one of the robbers becomes more aggressive, Coulson calmly and efficiently disarms both men using grocery store items and hand-to-hand combat. The fight is quick, precise, almost boring to him, showing he's far more capable than he usually lets on. After neutralizing the robbers, Coulson returns to the counter. He apologizes to the cashier for the inconvenience, picks up his snack, and heads out the door.
What should I tell the police?
Tell them those Tybo tapes really paid off.
It's one of my favorite MCU one-shots. It's actually the first time I was introduced to Agent Coulson, having not seen the Iron Man films or Thor before watching this one-shot. This was my first introduction to the character. Really made me fall in love with this character from just a very quick one-shot. Not much to him, but it tells me everything I needed to know about this guy. So there's no big edits to this. Again, we're just going to change the end of the one-shot, and we're going to tease that Agent Coulson will return in Thor. Then we'll move on to the next and final project of 2011. It's Thor. Odin, king of the gods, once defeated the frost giants of Jotunheim to stop them from conquering the 9 realms. He took their powerful weapon, the Casket of Ancient Winters, and kept it in Asgard. Odin raises his sons Thor, the brash heir, and Loki, the clever but overshadowed younger brother. In the present day, Thor is about to be crowned king, but the ceremony is interrupted when frost giants secretly invade Asgard. Enraged, Thor disobeys Odin and leads a reckless attack on Jotunheim, with Loki and friends tagging along. The mission nearly restarts a war. Odin intervenes and strips Thor of his powers, banishing him to Earth and sending his hammer Mjolnir after him, now enchanted so that only the worthy may wield it. Thor crash lands in New Mexico. He's hit by a car driven by Jane Foster, an astrophysicist studying cosmic phenomena, along with her team, Darcy Lewis and Eric Selvig. Locals at the crater site attempt to lift Thor's hammer prior to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s arrival.
Did it work?
S.H.I.E.L.D. takes control of the site, confiscating Jane's research. Thor tries to retrieve Mjolnir, but finds he can't lift it. Thor is forced to live as a powerless mortal, learning humility the hard way. Back in Asgard, Loki learns he was adopted. He's actually a frost giant taken by Odin as a baby. Feeling betrayed and inferior, Loki spirals. When Odin falls into the Odin sleep, Loki becomes king and secretly plans to let the frost giants invade Asgard so he can destroy them and prove himself worthy. With the town of Puerto Antigua, New Mexico under attack by the destroyer sent by Loki, Thor sacrifices himself to defend his friends and the people. Because he sacrificed his life so that others could survive, Mjolnir flies back to Thor, proving he's worthy, restoring his power. Thor defeats the destroyer and embraces his role as a protector rather than a conqueror. Thor returns to Asgard and confronts Loki. Loki attempts to destroy Jotunheim entirely using the Bifrost, believing it will earn Odin's approval.
Why have you done this?
To prove to Father that I am a worthy son.
Thor stops the plan, choosing peace over glory. Loki refuses to accept defeat and falls into the void after letting go of Thor's hand. Odin awakens and mourns Loki. Thor accepts that he's not ready to rule yet. The Bifrost is destroyed, separating Thor and Jane across realms. In a post-credit scene, Nick Fury introduces Dr. Selvig to the Tesseract. Loki is revealed to be alive, subtly influencing Selvig, setting up his return in the Avengers. So no changes will be made to Thor. This is the only project outside of Agent Carter Seasons 1 and 2 that will not be changed for the purpose of this video. There's no need to change it. There's no conflict with where this film is placed within the MCU. The film even states that Thor will return in the Avengers. The post-credit scene properly sets up things to come, so there's no reason to change anything about this movie. So that closes out 2011. Then we go to the final year of Phase 1, which is 2012. Like it was in our reality, it's the same case for this reality, but unlike our reality, in this reality, we'll first start with the Incredible Hulk.
Any last words? Hulk! Smash!
Starring, yes, Edward Norton. There's some fallout probably in the production of this, just like there was in our reality, and they quickly recast the character because they had to jump right into production with the Avengers. So in between production of both films, Edward Norton either left or was fired, and Marvel brought in Mark Ruffalo to continue in the role through the rest of the MCU. The film opens with Bruce Banner hiding out in Brazil, working low-profile factory jobs while trying to stay calm. Bruce has a condition that turns him into the Hulk when his heart rate spikes. He communicates secretly with a mysterious online contact called Mr. Blue, who he hopes can help cure him. Banner survives by practicing breathing techniques and avoiding emotional triggers. Through brief flashbacks, Bruce was exposed to gamma radiation during an experiment meant to recreate the super soldier serum that made Captain America. The experiment went wrong, transforming Bruce into the Hulk instead. The movie skips a full origin and drops us straight into the chase. Banner's location is discovered after he accidentally contaminates a soda bottle with his blood. General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, obsessed with controlling the Hulk, sends a task force to capture him. The mission is led by Emil Blonsky, an elite but aging soldier hungry for power. Banner escapes by hulking out for the first time on screen. After witnessing the Hulk's strength, Blonsky volunteers for an experimental serum similar to what created Captain America. The serum gives him enhanced speed and strength, but also fuels his aggression and obsession. Remember what Erskine said.
The serum amplifies everything that is inside, so good becomes great, bad becomes worse.
He becomes increasingly unstable and desperate to match the Hulk. Bruce returns to the US and reunites with Betty Ross, his former love and the General's daughter. They reconnect emotionally and Betty becomes key to calming Bruce. Bruce meets Dr. Samuel Stearns, aka Mr. Blue, who claims he can cure Bruce using Banner's blood. Blonsky forces Stearns to inject him with Hulk blood, transforming him into the monstrous abomination. Stearns is exposed to Banner's blood, mutating his brain, setting up the Leader, a villain teased only to be paid off in last year's Captain America Brave New World, about 17 years later. The Abomination goes on a rampage in Harlem, demanding a fight with the Hulk.
Give me a real fight!
Bruce finally accepts that he may not be able to get rid of the Hulk and chooses to use it.
You think you can control?
No, not control it, but I don't know, maybe aim it.
He deliberately transforms and battles Abomination in a massive city-leveling fight. The Hulk defeats Abomination and saves civilians, proving he's not just a monster. In the aftermath, Bruce flees once again. Betty watches him disappear, heartbroken but hopeful. In the final moments, it appears that Bruce Banner has mastered his ability over his transformations into the Incredible Hulk. Remember, he's always angry. So this movie will require a few edits. Because this movie was originally released in 2008, now we're placing it as the lead-in to the Avengers. There's a few changes we're going to have to make with this movie. For the most part, the movie will remain the same, but we're going to have to change the end of the film just a little bit. So we're going to have a new end scene. Instead of the final scene of the film right before the credits being this scene between Tony Stark and Ross, it's going to be the scene where Bruce Banner, he's hiding out in that cabin in Canada at the end of the film. He's doing some meditations. His eyes light up green. The counter goes to 0 days without incident, and that's going to be the final scene where he's staring at the camera, probably about to transform into the Hulk. So that's going to be the final scene, and then we'll go to credits, and then we're going to make a post-credit scene for this movie for the first time. That scene between Ross and Stark was never a post-credit scene. It was just a scene that was tacked on right before the end credits started playing, so it was never really a true end credit scene anyway. But we're going to move that scene to a later point. Where can we put it in the MCU now that the Avengers is coming up next? We got to figure that out pretty quick, but trust me, it will work out. It's not going to be attached to this movie. The new end credit scene is actually going to be the opening scene from Captain America: The First Avenger. Remember, we removed the present day scenes from that movie, the opening and the ending. So the opening, when S.H.I.E.L.D. discovers Captain America's body in the Arctic, I think this is the perfect place to put that in this structure of the MCU. So it will now act as the post-credit scene of the Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk was all about the government trying to replicate the super soldier serum. So now let's go and discover the original super soldier, Captain America Steve Rogers. S.H.I.E.L.D. finds his body in the Arctic, and that's the post-credit scene for the Incredible Hulk.
What is it? My God. Paige, give me a line to the Colonel. This one's waited long enough.
And like with every film and one shot, we need to tease the return of these characters. And of course, the main character of this project was the Hulk. Yes, the character is going to be recast, played by a new actor in the Avengers, but the character is returning. So at the end of this, after the post-credit scene, on screen it's going to say that the Incredible Hulk will return in the Avengers. And that's the last edit we'll have to make for the Incredible Hulk. By doing all of this, it makes this film the perfect lead into the Avengers. Teases the return of the Hulk in the Avengers, and we've teed up the discovery of Captain America's body. We knew he wasn't dead, but he was out of action for almost 70 years. So now we'll see the return of Captain America pretty soon. But the next project after the Incredible Hulk is actually the next Marvel one-shot, The Consultant.
We have to send someone who will truly annoy him. Someone arrogant and abrasive, with an utter disdain for authority, someone who will offend the general to his very core.
You're talking about the
No, I'm not.
You just described him to a T.
I'm telling you right now, stop it. I am not calling the consultant.
The consultant stars S.H.I.E.L.D. agents Jasper Sitwell and Phil Coulson. The World Security Council wants Emil Blonsky released from prison and recruited for the Avengers initiative. S.H.I.E.L.D. strongly disagrees. Blonsky is unstable and dangerous. However, S.H.I.E.L.D. can't directly block the Council's order, so they look for a workaround. Coulson and Sitwell hatch a clever scheme. They'll send someone who is guaranteed to make General Ross furious. The goal is to provoke Ross into refusing to release Blonsky himself. Their choice is the consultant, Tony Stark. It was set up at the end of Iron Man 2 that he would now act as a consultant for S.H.I.E.L.D., and here is where we get to see him in that role. Stark meets with Ross in a bar under the guise of being a consultant for S.H.I.E.L.D. He is smug, dismissive, and casually insulting. He needles Ross about his failures, his ego, and the Hulk situation, exactly as planned. Ross explodes and refuses to cooperate with the World Security Council. As a result, Blonsky stays locked up and never becomes an Avenger. S.H.I.E.L.D. gets what it wants without technically disobeying orders.
The Abomination will remain in his cage for now. Apparently, the consultant outdid himself.
And at the end, Coulson and Sitwell toast to a job well done. So it's a pretty quick one-shot. Not much happens here, but it does take care of our problem of needing to move the end scene of The Incredible Hulk. Now we'll place it here with the one-shot, The Consultant. In the original release of The Consultant, there was a condensed version of this scene. Because the scene had already played out in The Incredible Hulk, there was no reason to play the whole scene out to its entirety. However, in this version, we're going to replace that condensed version with the full version of The Incredible Hulk end scene. So that's the major change we're going to be making to The Consultant, is instead of that condensed version of the scene between Stark and Ross, we're going to be using the full version from the end of The Incredible Hulk. And then finally, the other change we're going to be making is we'll have another statement. At the end of the one-shot, it's going to say that Agent Coulson will return in the Avengers. And that's the only other edit we'll have to make to this one-shot. So it works out perfectly to rearrange things as we have for this release order. The next thing we've got in the MCU and the final project of both 2012 and Phase 1 as the true culmination of the entirety of Phase 1, this Avengers assembled phase, is the Avengers. The film opens at a S.H.I.E.L.D. facility where scientists, including Dr. Eric Selvig, are studying the Tesseract. The cube suddenly activates, opening a portal. Loki arrives.
Sir, please put down the spear.
Steals the Tesseract, and uses his scepter powered by the Mind Stone to brainwash Selvig and S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Clint Barton, also known as Hawkeye, who was previously set up in a cameo appearance in Thor. Nick Fury realizes a global threat is underway.
What do we do?
Fury activates the long-dormant Avengers initiative, recruiting Tony Stark, also known as Iron Man, Steve Rogers, known as Captain America, Bruce Banner, known as the Hulk, Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, and Thor, who arrives independently to stop Loki. These strong personalities immediately clash. Egos, ideologies, and trust issues everywhere.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
You know, you may not be a threat, but you better stop pretending to be a hero.
Everything special about you came out of a bottle.
Loki intentionally gets captured. He wants to manipulate the team from the inside. He exploits their insecurities, Steve's outdated ideals, Tony's arrogance, Bruce's fear of the Hulk, and Thor's guilt. Meanwhile, Fury hides a secret. S.H.I.E.L.D. is developing weapons powered by the Tesseract.
What is Phase 2? Phase 2 is S.H.I.E.L.D. uses the cube to make weapons.
I'd like to know why S.H.I.E.L.D. is using the Tesseract to build weapons of mass destruction.
Because of him.
Me.
Undermining his moral high ground. Loki's allies attack the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. Hawkeye sabotages the ship. Banner transforms into the Hulk and goes on a rampage. Thor fights the Hulk, and Loki kills Agent Phil Coulson. A loss that deeply affects the team. Though Fury lies about Coulson's trading cards, his death becomes the emotional catalyst that finally unites the Avengers. The Avengers regroup. Steve takes leadership, Tony commits fully to the mission, Bruce returns now able to control the Hulk better than before, and they're finally functioning as a team. In the Battle of New York, Loki opens a portal above Stark Tower, allowing the Chitauri army to invade Earth. Each Avenger takes a role. Cap leads civilians, coordinates the team, Iron Man handles air combat, Thor battles Loki, Hulk smashes, and Hawkeye and Black Widow provide tactical support. The World Security Council launches a nuclear missile at New York to stop the invasion. Tony intercepts it and flies it through the portal, sacrificing himself to save the city. Hulk rescues Tony after he falls back through the portal, and Natasha closes the portal by returning Loki's scepter to Selvig.
We're not finished yet.
If it's all the same to you, I'll have that drink now.
Loki is captured and taken back to Asgard. The Avengers go their separate ways, but now as a real team. The world knows superheroes are real, and they just saved it. In the mid-credits scene, Thanos is revealed as the mastermind behind Loki's invasion, smiling at the idea of challenging Earth, setting up the greater story for the Infinity Saga. And finally, in a post-credits scene, the Avengers quietly eat shawarma as Tony Stark suggested. So the Avengers is one of my all-time favorite films. I'm sure it's a lot of your favorites, and as far as the MCU is concerned, it's one of the best in the series. Still considered the best by many, and definitely my favorite of Phase 1. So there's really not many edits that I gotta make to the Avengers, other than what do we do with that end scene from Captain America the First Avenger? Where do we put the scene where Cap wakes up in that S.H.I.E.L.D. facility and Nick Fury approaches him in the streets of New York City? Cap's a little disoriented and realizes he's not in his own time anymore. So what's happened? We're going to put that scene at the beginning of the Avengers. It's going to open the film. We'll start with Cap waking up a little disoriented in his new reality in the present day of New York City. Captain America is now woken up from the ice, a true man out of time. I think this is the perfect place to put this. Yes, thematically it probably worked better for Captain America the First Avenger. Of course, that scene ends with Cap saying,
I had a date.
It kind of ties better into the First Avenger, but for the purposes of this video, we're going to have this be the opening scene of the Avengers. Cap is back. He's been gone, he's been absent. We've treated it as though he was dead, was this fallen war hero lost to history, but now he's back.
You've been asleep, Cap, for almost 70 years.
So as the MCU, the people of the MCU would have perceived his return. That's how the audience is going to perceive his return and how we're going to view him throughout Phase 1 of the MCU. Now he's made his grand return back in the present day as one of the founding members of the Avengers. When that scene ends, then we'll jump into the remainder of the film. It extends this film a little bit in runtime, but not by much. So I think this could have been an easy change to make, and I think if this had been how the movie was edited and released, I don't think we would have had a problem with that. I think it would have worked out perfectly. And again, for the purposes of this video, for the purpose of this release order, I think it's necessary. So those are the big edits and changes I've made to the release order of Phase 1. Again, I think the MCU has been released in the wrong order since the beginning. We're really going to have a lot of fun with this as we get into Phases 4 and 5 and 6. We're going to have a lot of fun making those changes. I'm going to have a lot of fun with putting those videos together. But this video has been fun to do as well. It is a video I've been wanting to make for quite some time, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Go down in the comment section and let me know what you thought of the changes I made to the MCU, to Phase 1 of the MCU. Do you like the changes I made? Do you have some issues with the changes I made? I'd love to hear from you. Let's debate this. Let's talk about this. Do you agree with the changes I made? Do you think this makes for a better viewing experience for Phase 1 of the MCU? Would it have been better if we did start with the first Avenger? What if this is how the MCU was actually released? I'd love to hear from you. Did you like what I did with this video? I had a lot of fun putting it together, and I can't wait to do more in this series. I'm going to talk about how I would have done Phase 2, how I would have done Phase 3, and again, Phases 4 and 5. And this is kind of my lead-in series to Avengers Doomsday that we will be getting in December of this year. I'm really excited for the release of Doomsday and the other MCU projects coming out this year. And again, video I've been wanting to do for quite a while, and I'm glad I finally had a chance to do it. Finally glad I did do it, and I hope you liked what I did here. Go down in the comment section and let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Before I go, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos go live on this channel. When you do that, it always helps me out, and I greatly appreciate it. I hope you all have an awesome and a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video.